Good morning and welcome to Mindset Mondays with DTK. This is episode number 74 and had some very interesting, I'm using the new broadcast studio from Be Live, and it's kind of interesting this morning, so it may be a little bumpy as I play with it. So let's see if this is the right one first of all, and let's see how this goes. So again, hello and welcome to Mindset Mondays with DTK. This is episode number 74 in an ongoing series designed for folks with a growth mindset or those who'd like to create one, develop one. It's an opportunity to play with new ideas, new concepts, and try on new mindsets. So take a moment and click share on the bottom of your view of this video and share this with your audience, your community, and invite them to join the conversation. Okay, so here goes. Let's see how this plays out. All right, so the quote we're going to play with today is the idea that this is Simon Sinek. This is from one of his notes to inspire from earlier this month. The truth of most truths is that they are not perception and not, in fact, true. So this is our playground today. The idea, so back in college, I got some incredible, I'm going to call it relationship advice. The idea that in any interaction, there are three versions of what happens during that event. There's what I experience, there's what the other person experienced, and then there's what actually transpired. So regardless of what I think the experience is, the record or what the other person thinks of the experience or what actually happened, the record of the event is written through my lens, my perspective. It's basically my perspective becomes the recorded reality. Therefore, my perspective is my truth or the truth. That reshapes every experience. Because the other person in the interaction is also perceiving it through their lens, and they're recording the event through that lens, and therefore their perception becomes reality, becomes the truth. So both of us are speaking the truth in the way that we remember it. But it's not the truth of what actually transpired. There's all of my internal dialogue and how I translate the event and how I assume what's going on behind their eyes and what's going on in their head and what their intention is and what I meant and what I thought at the time. And then you sort of compound this, makes it a little messier. That when I remember something, I'm remembering the last way I remembered it, because as you remember it, you re-encode it and restore it. So neuroscience is telling us that our memory is incredibly flawed because we encoded initially into our memory based on the lens through which we saw it and how we perceived it. And then each time we remember it, we re-encode it into storage, and so it can be further distorted. It's like a ginormous game of telephone. Remember that game when you were a kid where you would sit in a circle and the first person would have a sentence to start with, and then you would whisper it to the person next to you, and they to the person next to them, and they to the person next to them, and all the way around the circle until the last person repeats what he or she heard, and the difference between the first person and the last person is enormous. It's inevitably enormous. And that's not even them having an experience, that's just repeating it and the distortion that happens through hearing and repeating. We have that same game of telephone going on in our head. So if truth is merely our perception, when we change our perception, are we changing the truth? And what's the standard? For those that hold truth as a core value, those that hold truth as a core value, how does this whole concept resonate? Now, for me, this makes a really entertaining exploration, diving into what is truth. outside of a legal or religious context, looking at the experience that we have in our everyday world. What is truth? If reality is merely only our perception, it's got a lot of power in it. Not that we can intentionally distort experience into our memory to live from there, but that we can decide what we want the world to be like and live into that. I heard a distinction during a conversation with one of my colleagues, with a group of us actually last week. The idea of the difference between a manager and an entrepreneur. A manager either is given the goal or creates a goal and then creates the plan to move towards that goal and manages that process, that plan, that execution to reach that goal. Reasonable? An entrepreneur decides what it is that he or she wants to exist or to be or to happen, and then sets about creating the conditions to create that eventuality. It's very different. Deciding what the truth will be and then creating the conditions for that truth to become the reality. The truth of most truths is that they are perception and not, in fact, true. We have the opportunity, through morphing our perception and deciding the lens through which we wish to see the world, to change what truth is. So just so you know, as you're watching this, where things are on the screen have changed. So my eyes are going to be all over the place for a little bit until I figure this piece out. Mary Virginia, I love this. Makes me think of the concept of living such that we honor our truest selves. The way that happens is by mindfully observing our internal environment and responding thoughtfully to what we find there. So what's true is in evolution. So what I love about that is I felt like I was really speaking about this, about perception of the outside world, and you really nailed it, looking back at the inside, Mary Virginia, of this being about the perception that we have about ourselves, that reflective intelligence, and not just the experiential view of the outside world. Mindfully observing our internal environment and responding thoughtfully. Guys, such a key word, not reacting to what we see on the internal view, examination, but to respond. Responding thoughtfully to what we find there. So what's true is an evolution. So the truth about what we are and who we are is also evolving based on our perception. And since we can control our perception, then we control what is true. Charlotte says, I was wondering if our subconscious memory of it is in unison with our current version. Okay, Charlotte, I have to sit with that one. How does our subconscious impact? Doesn't our subconscious twist the lenses that we use? That when we, back to respond versus react, when we are reacting, it's through the lenses that are unconscious or subconscious. I don't know. I have to play with that one, Charlotte. I'll get back to you in the thread. And again, a great opportunity to remind folk that this is not just a talking head conversation. So there's an opportunity to have these conversations. Come to the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Mindset Mondays. And each of these episodes is there with an opportunity to respond to each other's comments. So I definitely want to come back, Charlotte, and play with that one. And again, so this is the conversation. It's what is your truth about truth? As you listen to this, as you play with the idea of Simon Sinek's comment, the truth of most truths is that they are perception and not in fact truth. So as you look at the things that you make up as true and you've decided are true, and you operate your life from those truths, how does this change your perception? The danger in truth is that we so often make up what's true. We construct our own truths. And often through the narrative that we have for our internal dialogue, those saboteurs, those gremlins, that negative self-chatter, the caustic inner critic. The critic that says, "Ooh, don't do that, don't stretch. Don't be bigger than you are. You're not smart enough. You're not strong enough. You're not brave enough." And when you listen to those dialogues, those are just narrative input. And when we listen to the inner critic, whose sole job was initially to protect us, those are ineffective strategies communicated badly at the worst possible time. So when we listen to those old strategies communicated badly at the worst possible time, though they were intended to protect us, and then we make up that what they're saying is true and act upon that. Ooh. We're choosing that perception, that version of truth as our truth, and then we live from there. But they're not true. So the opportunity from this conversation is to re-examine what you hold as true. Decide what's actually true for you. Use current, accurate lenses that represent who you are and your values and your desires and what you crave for the future and what you want to create for the future. Sure. So I'm looking at Dan's comment. If there's an inner critic, could there not also be an inner promoter? There actually is, Dan, and in Shirzad Shamin, his work around saboteurs, and you can go to positiveintelligence.com, and on that website there's a link to his saboteur assessment, which is an incredibly powerful piece, giving you insight into the different types of saboteurs, those inner critics. His book and his body of work, and you'll get an introduction to it in his TEDx Stanford talk. He speaks to the idea of the sage, the 5 different sage voices that are your internal inner promoter. So it's a great question. And Dan, you and I have had conversations about your relationship with the inner critics and how little you surrender to them. The opportunity is to lean into the sage voice, to those inner champions, those inner promoters. And again, just like listening to your inner critic and deciding what's really true, and not simply taking that voice as truth. Same with the inner promoter, is learning to understand where that narrative serves. So great bringing that up, and I'll put the link into the thread here as well. But again, it's positiveintelligence.com, and you can look for the saboteur assessment and also follow the links to the TEDx Stanford talk on Shirzad Shamin's saboteur work. And so, Mary Jane, what I love about the comment, we all need to practice some good power poses every day. That's a great structure. Is it kinetic or kinesthetic? Kinesthetic work of using your body, and whether it's your Yul Brynner from The King and I, or Wonder Woman or Superman, whatever the power poses are, even outside of yoga, which I think is probably what you were talking about, is using your body to shift the dialogue and shift the perception, being intentional about what you want your thoughts to anchor around. So that's the opportunity for this week, is play with examining those things that you've made up are true and through which you are living day to day, and examine if they're true. Are they true? When did they become true? What makes them true? What if they're not? The beautiful opportunity is to play with, what if they're not true? What if that's merely just my perception? Rick Tamlin, his work around the bigger game, the theme of the undercurrent of all of his work, and he said it millions of times, and I know I've said it a bunch during these episodes, is it's all made up. So if it's all made up, why not make up something that serves? So for this week, why not make up something that serves? Examine your perceptions, test your realities, and make up one that serves. So between now and next week, as always, the question is, what mindset will you choose?